I didn't fake my life. That would have been easier to admit. I genuinely believed in it, at least at first. I believed that if I followed the path laid out in front of me, if I stepped into the role that fit best, everything else would fall into place. I didn't feel like I was pretending. I felt like I was adapting. That's how it starts. Someone suggests a direction. You try it. It works well enough. People respond positively. Doors open. Expectations form. And slowly, without any dramatic moment of consent, the role becomes permanent. I didn't wake up one day and decide to live someone else's life. I just kept choosing the version of myself that caused the least resistance. At the beginning, it felt like relief. I didn't have to search so hard. I didn't have to question every step. The path had structure, language, approval. When I followed it, things moved forward smoothly. People said I was doing well. I agreed because by every visible measure, I was. What I didn't notice was how rarely I made choices based on internal alignment. I chose based on logic, context, expectations. What made sense? What was reasonable? What fit the image that had already started forming around me? I learned how to perform that version of myself effortlessly. I knew what to say, how to react, what tone to use. I wasn't lying. I was just selecting. Over time, selection became habit. Habit became identity. The first warning signs were subtle. A sense of distance from my own reactions. Moments where I responded correctly but felt detached from the response. Laughter that sounded right but didn't linger. Decisions that moved my life forward without touching anything inside me. I told myself this was adulthood. That passion settles. That intensity is overrated. That not everything has to feel personal. I didn't realize I was slowly outsourcing my identity. I became very good at reading rooms. At understanding what was expected of me before it was spoken. I adjusted automatically. That skill made life easier and emptier. When people asked me what I wanted, I answered quickly. Confidently. The answers sounded solid. Convincing. They just weren't coming from a place I could still recognize. There were moments when I felt a strange grief with no clear cause. Not sadness, absence. As if something important had stepped out of the room quietly and never returned. I noticed it most at night, when distractions ran out and I was left alone with myself. Or whatever version of myself was left. I began to sense that I was living on momentum. One decision justifying the next. One role reinforcing another. There was no obvious crisis, which made questioning everything feel indulgent, even irresponsible. People would have traded places with me. That thought kept me silent. I didn't feel trapped. That's the hardest part to explain. I felt accommodated. Supported. Integrated into a life that worked, which made the growing sense of internal absence feel like a personal failure rather than a warning sign. What kind of person feels lost in a life that functions? So I stayed quiet. I told myself that identity is flexible. That people change. That maybe this was me now. The doubt I felt was just nostalgia for a version of myself that no longer applied. But doubt doesn't disappear when you dismiss it. It waits. The moment everything shifted wasn't dramatic. It was humiliating. Someone asked me a question I should have been able to answer instantly: what would you do if nothing was expected of you? My mind went blank. Not uncertain. Empty. I laughed it off. I said something vague. But inside, panic spread slowly, like cold water. I realized that without the structure of expectation, without the role I had been inhabiting for years, I didn't know how to orient myself at all. That's when it hit me. I wasn't choosing my life anymore. I was maintaining it. The person I had become functioned perfectly within the framework I'd accepted. But outside of it, I felt undefined. Weightless. Replaceable. As if I could be removed without anything essential changing. That night, I stood in front of a mirror longer than usual. Not searching for flaws, searching for recognition. I looked familiar and foreign at the same time. I wondered when I had last felt spontaneous. When I had last surprised myself. When I had last acted without first calculating how it would fit into the life I was supposed to be living. I couldn't remember. That was the moment I understood the truth I had been avoiding. I hadn't lost myself in a tragedy. I had misplaced myself in a life that made sense. And I didn't know if I could find my way back. After that question, everything I did started to feel staged. Not fake rehearsed. Like I was stepping onto a set every morning, hitting my marks, delivering lines that sounded natural because I had said them so many times before. I hadn't been lying to people. I had been lying by omission, leaving out the part of me that no longer knew how to speak. I tried to ignore the feeling. I told myself everyone goes through this. Midlife doubts. Existential noise. You don't dismantle a functioning life just because you feel disconnected from it. You learn to live with the distance. That was the advice I gave myself. It didn't work. The more I tried to lean into the role, the more artificial it felt. Compliments slid off me without landing. Achievements felt borrowed. Even frustration felt second-hand, like I was reacting the way someone in my position was supposed to react. I began to fear that the real problem wasn't the life I was living, it was me. That maybe I had become so adaptable, so flexible, that there was nothing solid left underneath. That I had worn the role for so long it had reshaped me completely. That thought terrified me. Because if there was no real me beneath the performance, then there was nothing to return to, no authentic self waiting patiently to be reclaimed. Just layers of adjustment, expectation, habit. I started searching for evidence. I paid attention to my reactions, looking for something instinctive, unfiltered. I tried to notice what sparked irritation, excitement, resistance. Most of the time, the signals were weak or contradictory. I felt like a radio trying to tune into a frequency that no longer existed. The fear deepened. What if I had optimized myself out of existence? I had spent years becoming the most compatible version of myself. The version that fit easily into conversations, into plans, into other people's lives. I had minimized friction so effectively that I had also erased texture. Texture is what makes a person recognizable. Without it, I felt interchangeable. There were moments when I caught flashes of something unfamiliar, a sudden surge of anger at an innocent comment, a sharp envy towards someone living messily, imperfectly, out loud. Those flashes scared me. They felt unearned, disproportionate. I didn't trust them. So I suppressed them too. That's when the internal conflict became unbearable. I was no longer just disconnected, I was divided. One part of me maintained the life. Another part watched in silence, increasingly resentful, increasingly desperate to be acknowledged. I stopped sleeping well. My mind replayed conversations, not for what was said, but for what I hadn't said. I began imagining alternate versions of myself, not better, not happier, just different. Versions who had said no at crucial moments. Who had taken paths that felt wrong on paper but right in the body. Those imagined lives haunted me more than regret ever had. I tried to trace the problem back to a single choice, a moment where I had veered off course. I couldn't find one. That made it worse. There was no mistake to fix, no apology to make, no decision to undo. Just an accumulation. The realization that hurt the most was this: no one had stolen my life from me. I had handed it over willingly, piece by piece, in exchange for ease. Ease of explanation. Ease of belonging. Ease of being accepted without question. And now, ease had become emptiness. I started to withdraw emotionally, even from people I cared about. Not because I didn't care, because I didn't know how to show up as myself anymore. Every interaction felt like an act. The idea of being seen, truly seen, filled me with panic. Seen as what I didn't know. There was a moment, late one evening, when I realized I had stopped imagining the future altogether. Not because I was afraid of it, but because it felt irrelevant. The future was just a continuation of the role. The same structure, slightly older. That's when despair settled in, not loud, not dramatic, but heavy and persistent. I wasn't unhappy. I was absent. And absence, when you live inside it long enough, starts to feel permanent. I began to wonder whether this was the price of adulthood, whether everyone eventually becomes a function of their circumstances. Whether the idea of a true self is just a comforting myth people grow out of. If that was true, then there was nothing to fix. Only something to endure. But a quieter thought kept interrupting that resignation, and it wouldn't go away. If this really is all there is, why does it hurt this much to accept it? That question stayed with me, unanswered, pressing harder each day. It didn't offer solutions. It didn't demand action. It only demanded honesty. And honesty, I was beginning to understand, might dismantle everything I had built. I thought the worst part would be realizing I didn't know who I was anymore. I was wrong. The worst part was realizing that nothing external was going to collapse and force the issue. No crisis. No breakdown dramatic enough to justify escape. The life I was living would continue to function perfectly well without my presence inside it. That meant the decision, if there was going to be one, had to come from me. And I had no idea how to make it. For a long time, I stood still. Not literally, but internally. I went through my days with the same precision as always, while something inside me waited. For what? I didn't know. Permission, maybe. Certainty. A sign that this emptiness was real enough to act on. None came. What did come was exhaustion. Not physical, existential. The fatigue of maintaining coherence without conviction. The strain of being consistent in a life that no longer felt like it belonged to me. One evening, alone, I tried an experiment. I asked myself a question and didn't allow myself to answer logically. Not what makes sense. Not what's expected. Not what keeps things intact. Just, what feels true right now. The answer didn't arrive as a sentence. It arrived as resistance. A tightening. A heaviness. A refusal. That was all I had. But it was enough. I realized then that I didn't need to find a fully formed real self to return to. That person might never have existed in the way I imagined. Identity wasn't something I had lost, it was something I had stopped participating in. I had been waiting to discover myself, when what I actually needed was to risk myself. That understanding didn't make things easier. It made them harder. Because it meant there was no hidden truth waiting to be uncovered, no authentic version of me guaranteed to feel right once I reached it. There was only choice. And choice without guarantees is terrifying. I didn't make a grand decision. I didn't leave everything behind or reinvent my life overnight. That would have been another role, another performance. Instead, I did something smaller and more destabilizing. I stopped optimizing. I stopped choosing the option that fit best, sounded smartest, looked most reasonable. I allowed myself to choose things that felt slightly wrong, slightly awkward, slightly unfinished. I disappointed people. Not intentionally, inevitably. I hesitated where I used to agree instantly. I questioned plans I would have accepted without thought. I admitted uncertainty instead of presenting confidence. Each of those moments felt like failure. But something else happened alongside the fear. I felt friction. And friction meant contact. For the first time in years, my actions left marks. Conversations didn't slide off me. Decisions stayed with me. I felt anxiety, yes, but also ownership. The sense that if I was uncomfortable, it was because I was actually there. The emptiness didn't vanish. It resisted. Some days it came back heavy, convincing, telling me I had made a mistake. That this was pointless. That ease was better than authenticity. That absence hurt less than risk. On those days, I almost went back. But then I noticed something important. Even on my worst days now, I felt more than I had on my best days before. I wasn't fulfilled. I wasn't confident. I wasn't sure where this was leading. But I was present. And presence, I learned, is not a feeling. It's a commitment. One you renew every time you choose not to disappear. I stopped asking myself who I really was. That question had become a trap, an excuse to wait. Instead, I started asking something simpler and more uncomfortable: am I here for this moment, or am I performing it? That question changed everything. Some relationships couldn't survive the shift. That hurt more than I expected. It forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth: some connections had been built around my adaptability, not my presence. When I stopped being easy, they stopped fitting. I grieved those losses quietly. Others changed shape. Slower. More awkward. More real. They required negotiation instead of assumption. I didn't always like that, but I respected it. Most importantly, my relationship with myself changed. I stopped treating my inner absence as a flaw to fix and started treating it as information. A signal that I had been living in response mode for too long. That I had confused fitting in with belonging. I didn't recover a forgotten self. I built one slowly, inconsistently, without certainty. There are still days when I feel the pull to slide back into the role. To let expectations decide for me. To become easy again. That part of me didn't die. It waits. But now I recognize it for what it is: the voice of comfort, not truth. If you're listening to this and you feel like your life works but you are missing from it, I want to tell you to burn everything down. That's another fantasy of clarity. What I will tell you is this: you don't lose yourself all at once. And you don't find yourself all at once either. You return by choosing presence over polish. Friction over ease. Participation over approval. I lived someone else's life because it was easier. Because it fit. Because it worked. Walking away from it didn't give me answers. It gave me something harder: responsibility for being here. And for the first time in a long while, when I look in the mirror, I don't feel recognition. I feel contact. And that's enough to begin.